Imagine driving down a lonely highway when suddenly you spot a group of bikers laughing at a helpless stray dog. What happens next is something you would never expect. Stick around because this story will restore your faith in the impossible. The day began like any other sunny afternoon, the highway buzzing with activity. A pack of bikers rode along, their engines roaring as they passed by a scruffy, malnourished dog lingering near the roadside. The dog, clearly a stray, had patches of fur missing and limped slightly. Despite its appearance, the dog's eyes radiated a quiet resilience. As the bikers slowed down near the dog, instead of showing kindness, they began to mock it. Some laughed, others threw empty water bottles, and a few revved their engines loudly to scare the poor animal. The stray stood its ground, unfazed by the loud noises or cruel gestures, but this wasn't an ordinary dog. Little did they know this brave soul had an extraordinary story waiting to unfold. What happened next would leave everyone, including the bikers, absolutely stunned. Imagine driving down a lonely highway, the sun beating down relentlessly as cars and motorcycles speed past in a blur of noise and motion. The day feels like any other, ordinary in every way, until your gaze shifts to the side of the road. There, amidst the dust and debris, stands a dog astray with matted fur patches missing here and there, and a slight limp that hints at an old injury. Its ribs are visible beneath the scruffy coat, evidence of days, maybe weeks of hunger. Yet, despite its disheveled appearance, there's something striking about the dog. Its eyes, dark and deep, hold a glimmer of resilience, an unspoken story of survival. The hum of approaching engines grows louder, signaling the arrival of a group of bikers. Their presence is unmistakable, a loud, roaring symphony of machines and laughter as they make their way down the highway. As they approach the spot where the dog stands, some of them slow down, intrigued by the sight of the lone animal by the roadside. What could have been a moment of compassion or curiosity, however, takes a cruel turn. The bikers begin to mock the dog, their laughter echoing in the otherwise still air. One of them, a man with a leather jacket adorned with patches, points at the dog and shouts something that makes the others roar with laughter. Another rider picks up an empty water bottle and tosses it toward the animal. It lands a few feet away, the hollow thud startling the stray, but not enough to make it run. The dog doesn't flinch. It simply stands there, watching them with unblinking gaze. For a moment, it seems as though the bikers might move on. Their engines rev loudly, and the group begins to pick up speed. Yet, as the motorcycles roar past, the dog does something unexpected. It starts to follow them. At first, it's a slow, hesitant trot, but as the bikers continue, the dog picks up its pace, its limp barely hindering its determined stride. This isn't the reaction the bikers anticipated. One of them glances in the rearview mirror and notices the dog trailing them. He nudges the rider next to him, and soon the group slows down again, turning their heads to look back at the persistent stray. They share puzzled expressions, some amused, others indifferent. One of them shouts over the noise of the engines, "Looks like we've got a new recruit." The group erupts in laughter, their voices mingling with the hum of the machines. Despite their mocking, the dog doesn't stop. It continues to follow, its steps unwavering. The highway stretches on, the heat rising in visible waves off the asphalt, but the dog remains resolute. Every now and then, it stumbles slightly, its limp more pronounced on the uneven surface, but it always gets back up, never losing sight of the bikers ahead. For miles, the scene unfolds, the roaring motorcycles leading the way, and the stray dog, a determined shadow, trailing behind. The bikers, initially amused, begin to exchange curious glances. What was it about this dog that kept it going? Why wouldn't it give up? They had encountered countless strays on their journeys before, but none had behaved like this. One of the bikers, a younger man with a scruffy beard and kind eyes, feels a pang of something, pity perhaps, or maybe a flicker of admiration for the animal's perseverance. He slows his bike further, falling back from the group to get a better look at the dog. It's panting heavily now, its tongue lolling out as it struggles to keep up. Yet in its eyes, he sees the same determined glint that had been there from the start. The group decides to stop at a rest area, a small clearing on the side of the highway with a few shaded benches and a vending machine. As they dismount their bikes, the stray finally catches up, collapsing on the ground a few feet away. It's exhausted, its chest heaving with every breath, but there's a strange pride in the way it lies there, as though it has accomplished something significant. The bikers gather around, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others chuckling at the absurdity of the situation. "What's with this dog?" One of them mutters. Another shrugs, tossing a half-eaten sandwich in the dog's direction. The stray lifts its head, sniffing cautiously before dragging itself toward the food. It eats slowly, savoring every bite, its tail wagging faintly as it does. As the group watches the dog, their initial amusement begins to give way to something else, curiosity perhaps, or reluctant respect for the animal's sheer determination. The younger biker with the scruffy beard crouches down, holding out a small bottle of water. "Here, buddy," he says softly, pouring some water into a makeshift bowl fashioned from an old food container. The dog approaches cautiously, its movements tentative, but eventually it drinks, its tail wagging a little more enthusiastically now. The scene feels almost surreal. A few hours ago, the bikers had been mocking the stray, treating it as little more than a roadside nuisance. Now, they found themselves drawn to it, unable to ignore the silent strength it seemed to exude. They exchanged stories about other animals they've encountered on the road, their laughter softer now, tinged with something akin to reflection. As the sun begins to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the highway, the bikers prepare to move on. The younger man glances back at the dog, which is still lying near the rest area, watching them intently. He hesitates for a moment, then shakes his head and climbs onto his bike. "Let's go," he says, his voice tinged with reluctance. But as the engines roar to life and the group begins to ride away, the dog does the unthinkable. It gets up and starts following them again. This time its limp is more pronounced, it steps slower, but its determination is as strong as ever. The bikers are at a loss for words. They don't stop this time, but every few miles one of them glances back, half expecting the dog to have given up. Yet, every time they look, it's still their small, scrappy figure against the vast expanse of the highway, unwavering in its pursuit. What could possibly drive a stray dog to follow a group of strangers across miles of blistering asphalt? Was it hope? Instinct? Or something deeper, something that the bikers themselves couldn't quite understand? As the highway stretched on and the sun dipped closer to the horizon, the answer remained a mystery. But one thing was clear, this dog was no ordinary stray. It was a creature with a purpose, a story waiting to be told. And though they didn't know it yet, this journey was about to take a turn that none of them would ever forget. As the bakers continued their journey and seemingly steer of highway, the stray dog remained behind them, unrelenting in its pursuit. The roar of the engines filled the air, drowning out most other sounds, yet the steady rhythm of the dog's determined stride seemed to echo in the minds of the riders. Every time they glanced in their mirrors, they saw it panting, its tongue hanging out, its body clearly pushed to its limits, but still moving forward. The sight began to weigh on them, a silent challenge to their initial indifference. At first, the bikers found the dog's persistence amusing, even entertaining. They exchanged jokes and laughed about how it seemed the dog wanted to join their group. "We should get it a leather jacket," one of them said with a smirk, prompting a round of chuckles. But as the miles passed and the dog refused to stop, their amusement faded into something more complicated, something they weren't quite ready to admit to themselves. The stray was clearly exhausted. Its pace had slowed, and every step seemed to take more effort than the last. The limp in its gait was becoming more pronounced, but it didn't falter. It didn't turn back. It didn't give up. There was a resilience in its actions that was impossible to ignore, a determination that seemed to demand recognition. Eventually, the group decided to stop again, this time near a small clearing by the side of the road. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. The air was cooler now, the oppressive heat of the day giving way to a gentle breeze. The bikers parked their motorcycles and dismounted, stretching their legs and shaking off the fatigue of the ride. The dog arrived moments later, its body heaving with each labored breath. It collapsed onto the ground a short distance away, too tired to move any closer. For a while, no one said anything. The bikers stood in silence, watching as the dog lay there, its chest rising and falling rapidly. One of the bikers, a man named Alex, couldn't take his eyes off the animal. There was something about the dog that struck a chord deep within him, something he couldn't quite put into words. He approached cautiously, kneeling a few feet away. The dog lifted its head slightly, its eyes meeting his. In that moment, Alex felt a connection, a silent understanding that transcended words. He reached into his bag and pulled out a bottle of water, pouring some into a small plastic container he had on hand. Sliding the container toward the dog, he waited. The dog hesitated at first, eyeing him warily, but the exhaustion and thirst were too much to resist. Slowly, it crawled forward and began to drink, its tongue lapping up the water with desperate urgency. The other bikers watched in silence, their earlier amusement replaced by a quiet sense of respect. One of them, a burly man with a deep voice, broke the silence. "What's driving it?" he asked, his tone more thoughtful than mocking. "Why doesn't it just stop?" No one had an answer. They could only watch as the dog finished drinking and lay back down, its eyes never leaving the group. As the bikers rested, they began to discuss the dog in earnest. Some speculated that it might have been abandoned by a previous owner, left to fend for itself on the unforgiving highways. Others wondered if it had been born astray, its life a constant struggle for survival. But no matter the origin, one thing was clear: this dog was different. Its persistence, its unyielding determination to stay with them was unlike anything they had ever seen. After a while, the group decided it was time to move on. The sun was dipping lower on the horizon, and they still had miles to cover before reaching their destination. As they mounted their bikes and started their engines, Alex glanced back at the dog. It was still lying there, its body too tired to move, but its eyes were alert, watching their every move. He hesitated, torn between the urge to leave and the inexplicable pull to stay. But before he could make a decision, the dog made it for him. With a great effort, it pushed itself to its feet and began to follow once again. The bikers rode on, their engines roaring as the landscape blurred around them, and still, the dog followed. Its pace was slower now, its movements more labored, but it didn't stop. Every now and then, one of the bikers would glance back, half expecting the dog to have given up. But every time it was there, a small, determined figure against the vast expanse of the highway. As the miles stretched on, the bikers found themselves thinking more and more about the stray. It was impossible not to. The dog had become a part of their journey, a constant presence that refused to be ignored. For Alex, especially, the dog's persistence struck a deep chord. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something the animal was trying to convey, some unspoken message hidden in its actions. At their next stop, a small roadside diner, Alex decided to take a closer look at the dog. It arrived a few minutes after they did, collapsing once again a short distance away. This time, Alex didn't hesitate. He approached with a bottle of water and a piece of bread he had bought from the diner. The dog accepted the offerings gratefully, its tail wagging faintly as it ate. As Alex sat there watching the dog, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of admiration. This animal, despite everything it had likely been through, refused to give up. It was a lesson in resilience and the kind of determination that most people could only aspire to. The other bikers, too, were beginning to see the dog in a new light. They stopped making jokes, their earlier mockery replaced by a quiet respect. One by one, they offered scraps of food, small gestures of kindness that spoke volumes. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the sky, the bikers prepared to set off once more. This time, they found themselves looking back for the dog, not with annoyance or curiosity, but with genuine concern. And, as it had done all day, the dog followed. It was slower now, its movements more labored, but it didn't stop. It didn't give up. For Alex and the others, the sight of the dog trailing behind them was no longer just an oddity. It was a reminder, a living, breathing symbol of perseverance in the face of adversity. And though they didn't know it yet, their journey with the stray was far from over. Something extraordinary was about to happen, something that would change not only the course of their journey, but their lives as well. The bikers continued their ride as the highway twisted and turned through the countryside, the golden glow of the setting sun casting long shadows across the pavement. The dog, still following, was now visibly struggling, each step slower than the last. Its body seemed to move on sheer willpower, its legs trembling but refusing to give out. By this point, the bikers were no longer amused or indifferent. They were invested, drawn into the inexplicable determination of the stray that refused to be left behind. One of the bikers, Alex, couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the dog was trying to communicate something. Each time he looked back, he saw the animal's unwavering focus on them. It wasn't just following out of instinct or desperation. There was something more deliberate in its actions, as though it had a purpose only it understood. As night began to fall, the group decided to stop at a small roadside gas station, a place with flickering neon lights and an air of quiet desolation. The bikers pulled into the lot, parking their motorcycles near a row of dusty vending machines. The dog arrived moments later, collapsing onto the ground a short distance away. Its tongue hung out as it panted heavily, its body visibly drained from the relentless pursuit. Alex walked over to the dog with a bottle of water and knelt beside it. He poured some of the water into a shallow dish and slid it closer. The dog hesitated for a moment before inching forward to drink. Its eyes met Alex's, and for a brief second, there was a spark of recognition, almost as if it was thanking him without words. The group gathered around, their earlier mockery replaced by genuine concern. One of the bikers, a tall man with a deep voice named Marco, spoke up. "What's driving this thing? It's like it won't quit no matter what." Another chimed in, "Maybe it's just hungry, or maybe it thinks we're its ticket to a better life." But Alex shook his head. "No, it's more than that. Look at that. Look at it. It's not just following us for food. There's something it's trying to tell us." The bikers exchanged skeptical glances but didn't argue. The dog's behavior had been anything but ordinary, and by now, they were willing to consider that there might be more to this stray than met the eye. As they debated, the dog suddenly lifted its head, its ears pricking up. It let out a single sharp bark before scrambling to its feet. The bikers watched in confusion as the dog began to move, its body still weak, but driven by an unmistakable urgency. It barked again, this time louder, and started heading toward a patch of overgrown grass on the side of the gas station. "What's it doing now?" Marco asked, frowning. Alex was already on his feet, following the dog. "I don't know, but I think we should find out." The rest of the group hesitated before reluctantly trailing after him. The dog led them to a ditch partially hidden by tall weeds. It stopped at the edge, barking insistently and pawing at the ground. "What's in there?" one of the bikers muttered, peering into the shadows. Alex crouched down for a better look. At first, he saw nothing but darkness and debris. But then, as his eyes adjusted, he spotted movement, a small, trembling figure huddled among the trash. "It's a puppy," Alex said, his voice filled with disbelief. He reached into the ditch carefully, his hand brushing against something warm and soft. The puppy let out a faint whimper as he lifted it out, its tiny body shaking with fear and cold. The bikers gathered around, their earlier skepticism replaced by a mix of astonishment and guilt. The stray dog, now sitting nearby, watched intently, its eyes never leaving the puppy. "It must be its pup," Marco said, his gruff voice softer now. "Or maybe not," Alex replied, cradling the puppy gently. "But it's clear it's been protecting this little one. That's why it's been following us. It needed help." The realization hit the group like a punch to the gut. They had mocked the stray, thrown things at it, and dismissed it as just another roadside nuisance. Yet, through it all, the dog had persisted, driven by a need to save the puppy it had somehow taken under its wing. One of the bikers, a woman named Rachel, knelt beside Alex and the puppy. "It's so small," she murmured, brushing dirt off its fur. "How did it survive out here?" "The stray must have been looking after it," Alex said. He glanced at the dog, who was now lying down, its body visibly relieved but its eyes still focused on the puppy. "It's a hero, really." The group stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. They had spent the day riding through the countryside, oblivious to the struggles of this stray and the tiny life it was protecting. Now, faced with the undeniable courage and determination of the animal, they felt a deep sense of respect and shame. "We can't just leave him here," Marco said, finally breaking the silence. Alex nodded. "No, we can't. They've been through too much already." The bikers quickly came up with a plan. Alex would take both the stray and the puppy to the nearest veterinarian to ensure they were healthy and safe. The others would continue on their journey but promised to stay in touch and help however they could. As Alex prepared to load the dogs into a makeshift carrier he had fashioned from his saddlebag, the stray approached him. It sniffed at the puppy in his arms, its tail wagging faintly as if to reassure itself that the little one was safe. Alex reached out, scratching the stray gently behind the ears. "You've done an amazing job," he said softly. "But it's time for us to help you now." The dog seemed to understand, its eyes softening as it allowed Alex to guide it toward the carrier. Once both dogs were secured, Alex mounted his bike, ready to set off toward the nearest town with a veterinary clinic. The rest of the group watched him go, their hearts heavy but their spirits lifted by the extraordinary events of the day. They had started their journey as a group of carefree bikers, indifferent to the world around them. Now they were leaving with a newfound sense of compassion and a story that would stay with them forever. As Alex rode off into the night, the stray dog and its tiny companion safely in tow, he told but marvel at the strength and courage of the animal that had brought them all together. It had faced impossible odds, endured unimaginable hardships, and never once given up. The stray wasn't just a dog, it was a symbol of resilience, a reminder of the power of love and determination. And as Alex glanced back at the carrier, where the two dogs were now resting peacefully, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. This wasn't the journey he had expected, but it was one he would never forget. The journey toward the nearest town was quiet, with only the hum of the motorcycle engine and the soft rustling from the carrier breaking the stillness of the night. Alex's thoughts were consumed by the day's events, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders as he rode. The stray dog and its tiny companion had endured so much, yet their spirit remained unbroken. It was a lesson in resilience, a story he felt deeply connected to now. The road stretched endlessly before him, illuminated by the bike's headlight. The town wasn't far, but the darkness of the countryside made every mile feel longer. Occasionally, Alex glanced back at the carrier. The puppy was curled up, fast asleep, while the stray kept a watchful eye on it, its body shielding the smaller dog as much as the limited space allowed. There was an unspoken bond between the two, one that transcended words, and actions, a silent promise to protect and care for each other, no matter the cost. When Alex finally arrived at the veterinary clinic, he was relieved to see lights still on despite the late hour. He parked the bike and carefully removed the carrier, cradling it as he entered the building. The vet on duty, a kind-looking woman named Dr. Harris, greeted him with a curious yet concerned expression. "You've got quite a story here," she remarked, gesturing to the dogs. Alex nodded, recounting the events of the day as Dr. Harris examined the animals. She listened intently, her hands gentle but efficient as she checked the stray for injuries and assessed the puppy's condition. "The puppy is malnourished but otherwise healthy," she said after a thorough examination. "With proper care and nutrition, it should recover fully." Her tone grew more somber as she moved on to the stray. "This one, though, has been through a lot. It's dehydrated, exhausted, and has a few old wounds that have started to heal poorly. But its determination is remarkable. Most dogs in this condition wouldn't have made it this far." Alex felt a pang of guilt. The stray had done so much to protect the puppy, pushing itself to the brink of collapse, and he had initially dismissed it as nothing more than a nuisance. Now, seeing the toll it had taken on the dog, he was more determined than ever to make things right. "Can you help them?" he asked, his voice tinged with urgency. Dr. Harris smiled reassuringly. "I'll do everything I can. They're fighters, both of them. They just need some time, care, and a safe place to recover." Over the next few hours, Dr. Harris and her team worked tirelessly to stabilize the stray and the puppy. Alex stayed by their side, his presence a quiet but steadfast source of comfort. As the night wore on, he found himself reflecting on the bond between the two animals. It wasn't just a matter of survival, it was a profound connection built on trust, loyalty, and love. The stray had chosen to protect the puppy, despite the risks and hardships involved. It had followed Alex and the bikers not out of desperation, but out of hope, a hope that someone would care enough to help. And in doing so, it had reminded Alex of something he had nearly forgotten, the importance of compassion, even in the face of indifference. By the time the sun began to rise, the dogs were resting comfortably in one of the clinic's recovery rooms. Dr. Harris assured Alex that they would be closely monitored and given everything they needed to heal. "You've done a good thing," she told him as he prepared to leave, "not just for them, but for yourself. Acts of kindness have a way of changing us in ways we don't always realize." Alex nodded, her words resonating deeply. He left the clinic with a lighter heart, knowing the dogs were in good hands, but as he rode away, he couldn't shake the feeling that his journey with the stray and the puppy wasn't over. In the days that followed, Alex stayed in touch with Dr. Harris, calling regularly for updates. The news was always positive. The puppy was gaining strength, and the stray was slowly recovering from its ordeal. The other bikers, too, checked in from time to time, their initial indifference replaced by genuine concern. Eventually, Alex decided to visit the clinic again. When he arrived, he was greeted by the sight of the puppy bounding around the recovery room, its tiny tail wagging furiously. The stray, though still thin and a bit unsteady, was alert and visibly stronger. "They've come a long way," Dr. Harris said, smiling as she watched the two dogs interact. The puppy looks up to the stray like a parent. It's incredible how much they rely on each other. Alex knelt down, extending a hand toward the stray. It hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, its nose brushing against his palm. The gesture, simple as it was, felt like an acknowledgement, a sign of trust earned through actions rather than words. "What's next for them?" Alex asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Dr. Harris shrugged. "That depends. They'll need a permanent home, somewhere they can feel safe and loved. It's not easy finding someone willing to take on two dogs, especially one with the kind of history this stray has. But I have faith they'll find the right person." Alex didn't respond immediately. He watched as the puppy playfully tugged the stray's ear, its tiny bark filling the room with a sense of joy and hope. The stray endured the playful antics with patience, its tail wagging faintly as it nuzzled the smaller dog. In that moment, Alex made a decision. "I'll take them," he said, the words coming out with surprising certainty. "They've been through enough. They deserve a chance to live a good life, and I want to give them that." Dr. Harris's expression softened, a mix of relief and admiration. "Are you sure?" "It's a big responsibility." Alex nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything. They've already taught me so much about resilience, loyalty, and what it means to care. It's the least I can do." The adoption process was straightforward, and within a few days, Alex brought the dogs home. He named the stray Hero, a tribute to its incredible journey and unwavering determination. The puppy, full of boundless energy and curiosity, he named Chance, a reminder of the second chance at life they had both been given. Life with Hero and Chance was an adjustment, but one Alex embraced wholeheartedly. The dogs quickly became a part of his daily routine, their presence bringing a sense of joy and fulfillment he hadn't realized he was missing. Hero, ever the protector, kept a watchful eye on Chance, while the puppy's playful antics brought laughter and light to Alex's home. Word of their stories spread among Alex's friends and the local community, inspiring others to see stray animals in a new light. Hero and Chance became symbols of hope and resilience, their bond a testament to the power of love and determination. For Alex, the journey that had begun as a simple ride down a highway had turned into something far more meaningful. It was a journey of redemption, of learning to see beyond the surface and recognize the extraordinary in the ordinary. And every time he looked at Hero and Chance, he was reminded of the lesson they had taught him, that even in the face of adversity, compassion and kindness have the power to change lives, both theirs and his own. As he sat on his porch one evening, watching the sunset with Hero and Chance by his side, Alex couldn't help but smile. The road that had brought them together was long and winding, filled with unexpected twists and turns. But in the end, it had led to something truly remarkable, a bond that would last a lifetime. If this story inspired you, don't forget to share it with someone who could use a little reminder of the goodness in the world.